20 minutes before walking down the aisle, I was not adjusting my veil. Instead, I was rewriting the source code of our financial system to revoke every access right Harrison and my sister possessed. They believed this wedding was their coronation on the fortune I built, never suspecting that I did not come here to throw the bouquet. I came to detonate a time bomb that had been counting down for 5 long years. My name is Valerie Stone. I stood in the center of the bridal suite at the Pierre, a 6-star hotel in Manhattan that smelled of expensive white lilies and even more expensive lies. Before me, the custom Vera Wang gown hung on a mannequin like a ghost of the woman I was supposed to be today. It had cost $25,000, but as I ran my hand over the silk, I felt nothing. No flutter in my chest, no anticipation. Just a cold, hard resolve that had been hardening like concrete for the last 5 years. My phone vibrated on the marble vanity. It was the notification I had been waiting for from my private investigator. I picked it up and tapped the screen. The video feed was live, streaming directly from the groom's private lounge just down the hall. On the small screen, Harrison, my fiancé, and Chloe, my own flesh and blood sister, were tangled together on the leather sofa. They were not just betraying me, they were celebrating it. I turned the volume up. She's just a robot. Chloe, Harrison panted, his voice thick with lust and arrogance. A dry, boring cash machine. God, I can't wait until this is over. Chloe laughed, a sound that used to make me smile but now made my stomach turn. Let her have her big day. She doesn't know I'm carrying the real heir inside me right now. Once you sign those marriage papers, we kick her out of the company for good. I love you, babe. Only you. Harrison murmured. I did not cry. I did not throw the vase of flowers against the wall. I did not scream. Instead, I calmly walked over to my leather briefcase and pulled out my laptop. I sat down at the vanity, pushing aside the diamond tiara to make room for the machine. I logged into the Sterling Stone mainframe. The screen blinked with lines of code that were as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Harrison thought he was the CEO. Chloe thought she was the creative director. They believed their titles were etched in stone. They were wrong. Their titles were written in code, and I held the eraser. I navigated to the hidden root directory and located the file I had named Icarus. It was a protocol I had embedded deep within the system architecture 5 years ago, a kill switch designed for this exact moment. With a single keystroke, I initiated the sequence. Access denied. In less than 10 seconds, the system stripped Harrison of his CEO privileges. It locked Chloe out of the company servers. It froze their corporate credit cards and revoked their security clearances. I watched the progress bar hit 100% complete. I closed the laptop and stood up. The wedding dress remained on the mannequin. I turned my back on it and reached for the garment bag hanging on the door. I dressed quickly, pulling on a bespoke black suit that was sharp enough to cut glass. I went to the mirror and took a wet wipe to my face, scrubbing away the blushing bride makeup until my natural, pale complexion revealed a sharp, cold stare. I checked my watch. The ceremony was scheduled to start in 15 minutes. I grabbed my clutch and walked out of the suite. I did not head toward the ballroom where 500 guests were waiting. I walked straight to the service elevator and took it down to the loading dock. Outside, the air was crisp. A matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom was idling at the curb. The driver opened the door without a word. I slid into the back seat, the leather cool against my skin. Inside the ballroom, I knew exactly what was happening. Harrison's phone would be lighting up with frantic notifications from the bank. The transaction for the catering service, a bill of nearly $200,000 due upon commencement, would have just bounced. I poured myself a glass of red wine from the car's console. I took a slow sip, savoring the oak and tannins, and looked up at the towering hotel. "Drive," I said to the chauffeur. As the car pulled away, I tapped one final command on my phone. Inside the venue, The massive projection screen that was meant to display our montage of love suddenly went black, then flashed with bold white text. Wedding canceled. Welcome to hell, Harrison. The chaos that erupted in the ballroom was not just a scene, it was a masterpiece of social destruction, and I had the best seat in the house. I watched the live feed on my iPad from the comfort of my velvet armchair in my secret penthouse on the Upper West Side. On the screen, Harrison stood frozen under the giant projection that welcomed him to hell. 500 guests, including the sharks of Wall Street and the vultures of the press, were whispering furiously, their phones raised to capture the fall of the Sterling dynasty. Chloe, realizing the narrative was slipping away, decided to play her favorite card. She clutched her stomach, her face contorting in a practiced grimace. Oh God, my baby, she wailed, staggering toward the edge of the stage. I can't breathe. Someone help me. She collapsed onto the floor in a heap of white silk, waiting for the crowd to rush forward in sympathy. Instead, the hotel manager marched onto the stage. He stepped over her dramatic sprawl without a glance and held out a card reader to Harrison. The reception fee was due upon the start of the ceremony, the manager said, his voice clipped and professional. That will be $500,000. Immediately. Harrison, trying to regain his composure, scoffed and reached into his tuxedo pocket. He pulled out the Centurion Black card, the symbol of his unearned power. Don't be ridiculous, Harrison snapped, his voice cracking slightly. Put it on the card, and get this mess off the screen. The manager swiped the card. The machine let out a harsh, dissonant buzz that echoed through the silent ballroom. The manager looked at the readout and turned the screen toward Harrison. Declined, the manager announced, loud enough for the front row to hear. The error message is explicit. Account frozen. Code 00. Ownership revoked. That's impossible, Harrison shouted, slamming his hand on the podium. Run it again. Suddenly, a shrill shriek cut through the air. Evelyn Sterling, my almost mother-in-law, was shaking her finger in a waiter's face. Do you know who we are? She screamed, her face turning a blotchy purple. We are the Sterlings. I will have your job for this. You incompetent little... Don't you touch me! 2 large security guards had flanked her. They did not care about her surname. They only cared that the bill was unpaid and the guests were rowdy. They firmly took her by the elbows and began marching her toward the exit. Get your hands off me! Evelyn shrieked, kicking at the air. Harrison, do something, but Harrison could do nothing. Within 10 minutes, the entire Sterling clan and my sobbing sister were escorted out the side door onto the wet pavement of 58th Street. It was pouring rain, a cold, miserable downpour that soaked through their expensive clothes in seconds. They looked around wildly for the family driver. Where is he? Harrison yelled, wiping water from his eyes. Call him. I took a sip of my vintage Pinot Noir and smiled. I had sent the driver a text 5 minutes ago, giving him the night off and a $10,000 bonus. He was already halfway to Queens. On the screen, Harrison was frantically dialing his phone. I tapped into the audio surveillance to hear the conversation. He was calling the chief financial officer. Why are my cards declined? Harrison roared into the receiver. Fix it. Now I can't. Sir. The CFO stammered on the other end. The assets were tied to the marriage contract. Since the wedding was canceled, the system automatically transferred everything back to the original trust. You have no access. It is all gone. Chloe, whose fake fainting spell had miraculously cured itself the moment she was dragged outside, shoved Harrison hard. You said you had this under control, she screamed, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. You told me she was just a stupid cash cow. Now look at us. My shoes are ruined. You useless. Shut up, Chloe Harrison yelled back. This is your fault for taunting her in the dressing room. Watching them turn on each other was satisfying. But I had one more knife to twist. I placed a video call to Felix, my personal attorney. Valerie Felix answered, looking sharp in his office. "Execute the eviction protocol," I said calmly. "Seal the apartment." "Tonight." "With pleasure," Felix replied. I watched on the monitor as the trio finally managed to flag down a yellow taxi, likely using the last of the cash in Harrison's wallet. 20 minutes later, the camera feed from the lobby of their luxury apartment building showed them stumbling toward the elevator, wet and shivering. Harrison pressed his smart key against the sensor panel. The light flashed red. He pressed it again, harder. "Red, open! Damn you!" he shouted, kicking the door. He tried a third time. The panel remained stubbornly red. The concierge, a man Harrison had never bothered to tip, watched them from behind the desk with a blank expression. They were locked out. The princes of the city were officially homeless. I sat in the silence of my penthouse, the chaos of the wedding feeling a lifetime away. As the adrenaline faded, the ghosts of the past began to rise from the floorboards. I was never meant to be the protagonist of this story. In the script written by my adoptive parents, I was merely a supporting character, a prop acquired to prop up their biological miracle. Chloe. They adopted me when I was 6, not out of charity, but out of necessity. Chloe was beautiful, charming, and hopelessly lazy. My job was not to be her sister, but to be her academic crutch. While Chloe was chauffeured to ballet recitals and shopping sprees on Fifth Avenue, I was sent to work in my adoptive father's auto repair shop to earn my keep. It was there, amidst the smell of grease and gasoline, that I found my salvation. I salvaged an old, broken computer from the trash and taught myself to code on a screen that flickered like a dying candle. I met Harrison at Stanford University. The contrast between us was laughable. I was the scholarship student, the valedictorian of the computer science department who smelled faintly of motor oil. He was the golden boy, the heir to the Sterling Empire, which was secretly teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Harrison did not have the grades or the mind to save his legacy, but he had a smile that could melt logic. "We can build something incredible. Val," he used to whisper to me in the library, his hand covering mine over the keyboard. "Imagine a future where we run the world together. You and me. A real family. A real family." That was the bait. I was starving for it. So I worked. I poured my soul into the code. I wrote the artificial intelligence architecture that would become the backbone of the Sterling resurrection. I spent thousands of hours debugging, refining, and perfecting the algorithm while Harrison spent his time networking at fraternities and country clubs. When the software launched and the Sterling Stone Group skyrocketed to the #1 position in the market, Harrison stood on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. He was hailed as the visionary genius. I was just the fiancé in the background, the woman lucky enough to stand next to the sun. I accepted the shadows because I thought I was building a home there. But there was one person who saw through the glare: Richard Sterling, Harrison's father. Richard was a terrifying man, sharp as a razor and twice as cold. He never praised Harrison. He barely looked at him. One night, about 4 years ago, I was working late in the Sterling headquarters. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The office was empty, save for the hum of the servers. The door to my lab opened. Richard stood there, leaning on his cane, his eyes scanning the lines of code scrolling across my monitors. "Where is my son?" Valerie Richard asked, his voice gravelly. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keys. He is at a meeting with investors. "Sir," Richard laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "He is drunk at a club in Soho. We both know that." He walked closer, tapping the screen with the handle of his cane. "You built this. All of this. He doesn't even know how to turn the server on. Does he? I help him," I whispered, looking down. "You are the engine," Richard said softly, looking at me with a strange intensity. "He is just the paint job, a cheap coat of paint that is already peeling." I stayed silent. I stayed because I wanted to be a Sterling. I wanted to belong. But Chloe could not stand even that small victory. She began showing up at the office, bringing lunch for Harrison, wearing dresses that were too short and perfumes that were too strong. She would whisper in his ear that I was dragging him down, that I was too dull for his public image. She planted the seed that I was a leech, feeding off his success. 3 years ago, Richard Sterling passed away. The world thought he left everything to his beloved son. Harrison certainly thought so, but they were wrong. My mind drifted back to the day I found the envelope. It was taped to the underside of my desk in the lab, a place only I would ever look. Inside was a document that Richard had drafted in secret, his final act of defiance against his disappointing bloodline. It was a secondary will, a fail-safe protocol labeled the Richard text. It read simply, "To the one who built the empire. I leave the keys. To the one who merely inherited the name. I leave the illusion." I had held on to that secret for 3 years, waiting for the moment when the illusion would no longer be enough. Tonight, I had finally turned the key. The morning light filtered into the boardroom on the 45th floor, but it offered no warmth to the 12 men and women sitting around the mahogany table. They were the board of directors of the Sterling Stone Group, and they looked terrified. The company stock had dropped 7% since the opening bell, a direct result of the rumors swirling about the canceled wedding. I stood at the head of the table, dressed in a sharp navy blazer. I placed a thick leather folder in the center of the table. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, "you are panicked. You believe the company is leaderless. You are wrong. Harrison is the CEO. Valerie," the chairman said, wringing his hands. "We need him here to calm the investors. Where is he?" "Harrison is not the CEO." I replied, "He is a liability, and legally. He has been nothing more than a figurehead for 3 years. I opened the folder and slid the top document toward the chairman. "This is the Richard text," I said. "It is a permanent proxy agreement signed by Richard Sterling before his death. It stipulates that in the event of Harrison's gross negligence or moral turpitude, executive power reverts immediately to the person who actually built the technology, me." The chairman's eyes widened as he read the signature at the bottom. But I was not done. I connected my laptop to the projector. "Furthermore," I continued, "you are operating under the assumption that this company owns the AI source code that generates 90% of your revenue. That is incorrect." A new slide appeared on the screen. It showed the articles of incorporation for a company called Valkyrie Systems. "I own 100% of Valkyrie Systems," I stated. Sterling Stone was merely operating under a 5-year licensing agreement. That license expired yesterday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. As of this morning, you are selling unauthorized software. The room erupted into chaos. You held the company hostage," one director shouted. "I protected my intellectual property." I corrected him. Suddenly, the double doors banged open. Harrison and Evelyn stumbled in, followed closely by Chloe. They looked like refugees from a high society shipwreck. Harrison's shirt was unbuttoned, and Evelyn looked like she had aged 10 years in a single night. "She's lying," Harrison screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's a traitor. I am the CEO. I order you to arrest her." Evelyn slammed her hand on the table. "This is my husband's company. You cannot let this orphan steal it from us." I did not flinch. I simply pressed the next slide on my remote. "Since we are discussing theft," I said coldly, "let us examine the corporate expense accounts." The screen filled with bank statements. $3 million for a McLaren P1, I read aloud. $200,000 for a week at a private villa in St. Bart's. $50,000 a month transferred to an account under the name Sugar Baby Inc., all paid for with shareholder money. The directors gasped. They looked from the screen to Harrison with expressions of pure disgust. "This is embezzlement," the chairman said, his voice shaking with rage. "Harrison, is this true?" I was going to pay it back, Harrison stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It was just a loan. I moved to remove Harrison Sterling as CEO immediately, the chairman announced. And to appoint Valerie Stone as executive chairman, seconded 3 voices shouted at once. All in favor. Every hand in the room shot up. Chloe, realizing the ship was sinking, pushed her way to the front. She placed her hands protectively over her stomach. "You can't do this," she cried out, tears welling in her eyes. "I am pregnant. This is the Sterling heir. If you hurt us, you are hurting the future of this family. You have to support us." She looked at me, a smug glint hiding behind her tears. She thought the baby was her golden ticket, her immunity idol. I walked over to her. I leaned in close, so only she and Harrison could hear the ice in my voice. "Keep that pregnancy safe, Chloe," I whispered. "That is the only asset you have left." I straightened up and nodded to the security team waiting by the door. "Get them out," I ordered. "Confiscate their company phones and car keys in the lobby. They are trespassing. Valerie, please," Harrison begged as a guard grabbed his arm. "Valerie." "I love you. Get your hands off me." Evelyn shrieked as she was hauled away. I turned my back on them and looked at the board. "Now," I said. "Let us discuss the terms of your new license with Valkyrie Systems." The fall from the penthouse to the pavement was not just metaphorical, it was geographic. Within 48 hours of their eviction, the once mighty Sterling clan had relocated to a 2-bedroom walk-up in a grim industrial corner of New Jersey. It was the only place they could afford without a credit check. The walls were paper-thin. The carpet smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and regret, and the heating pipes rattled like a dying engine. I did not need to be there to see it. I could track their desperation through the digital breadcrumbs they left behind. Chloe was the first to break under the pressure of reality. She hauled her collection of limited edition handbags to a pawn shop on the Strip. I accessed the security feed of the shop, a little indulgency I allowed myself. This is a genuine Birkin." Chloe screamed at the man behind the counter, her voice shrill and desperate. "It is worth $20,000. You can't be serious." The pawnbroker, a man who had seen far more tragic figures than her, did not even look up from his ledger. "It is worth what I say. It is worth $500. Take it or leave it." "500, Chloe gasped, clutching the bag to her chest. "That won't even cover my prenatal vitamins." "Next," the man barked. She took the money. She had no choice. Harrison was faring no better. He put on his one remaining suit, which was now wrinkled and sad, and went on a tour of our competitors. He walked in, expecting to be greeted as a prodigal son, a seasoned CEO looking for a new kingdom. He walked out of every interview with his face burning in shame. I had made sure of that. The night before, I had emailed his true performance metrics to every HR department in the tech sector. "We don't have a position for a mascot." "Mr. Sterling," one hiring manager told him. "I ran a billion-dollar company," Harrison argued, his hands shaking. I am a visionary. You were a passenger," the manager corrected him. "Please close the door on your way out." Back at the apartment, the atmosphere was toxic. Evelyn Sterling, stripped of her country club membership and her social standing, sat on a stained sofa. She tried to call her friends, the women she had gossiped with for 40 years. One by one, they blocked her number. They think we are contagious." Evelyn sobbed into her hands. "Mrs. Vanderbilt cut me off. She said I was an embarrassment." "Shut up, Mother," Harrison yelled from the kitchen, where he was eating instant noodles. "This is your fault. You told me I was a genius. You told me I didn't need to learn the code." "Don't you dare speak to Mother like that," Chloe snapped, counting her crumpled $5 bills. "If you hadn't been so stupid to get caught on video, we would be in Paris right now." Me Harrison laughed, a manic, broken sound. You were the one who seduced me. You said Valerie was nothing. You said she was just a placeholder while they tore each other apart in a rat cage of their own making. I was soaring. I officially rebranded the company as Valkyrie Corp. I stepped into the light, giving interviews to the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. The headlines were ecstatic. The woman behind the curtain finally takes a bow, and Valerie Stone, the new face of tech ethics. I was the hero of the narrative. Harrison was the incompetent gold digger. But desperation breeds malice. I was sitting in my office, reviewing the quarterly projections, when a notification popped up on my private server. I had cut off Harrison's credit cards, but I had intentionally left his phone on my family plan. It was the ultimate surveillance tool. A text message from Chloe's number was sent to the tip line of the National Inquisitor, a notorious tabloid. I have a story about Valerie Stone. The text read, "She is a monster. She forced her own sister to terminate a pregnancy years ago. She stole the company from her fiancé. I want $50,000 for the exclusive interview. Cash." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. It was a vicious, disgusting lie, but it was exactly what I expected from a cornered animal. "Go ahead, Chloe," I whispered to the empty room. "Dig the hole deeper." I did not block the message. Instead, I picked up my phone and called my PR director. "Get the conference room ready," I said. "We are going to let them have their moment in the spotlight, and then we are going to crush them." The headline hit the newsstands like a dirty bomb at 6 a.m. The National Inquisitor ran it in bold, red font that took up the entire front page. The truth about Valerie Stone, the dictator who forced her sister to abort and stole her fiancé's company. It was a masterpiece of fiction, weaving tiny threads of truth into a tapestry of absolute lies. By noon, the public sentiment had shifted dangerously. My inbox, usually filled with business proposals, was now flooded with hate mail. Social media was on fire with hashtags calling for my resignation. I watched the stock ticker on my wall monitor. Valkyrie Corp shares dipped by 4%, then 5%. The board members were calling my private line every 10 minutes, terrified that the image crisis would destroy the upcoming product launch. "Valerie, we have to issue a denial," my public relations director pleaded, pacing back and forth in my office. "They are painting you as a monster. The women's rights groups are already organizing a protest outside the lobby." "Let them protest," I said, not looking up from my tablet. "Silence is louder right now. If I deny it, I look defensive. I need them to feel safe. I need them to get arrogant." I turned my attention to the live stream broadcasting from the cramped apartment in New Jersey. Harrison and Chloe were sitting on the floor, bathed in the soft, sympathetic light of a ring light they must have bought with their last few dollars. We just wanted a family." Chloe sobbed into the camera, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "Valerie always hated that I could have children and she couldn't. She told me she would ruin us if I didn't get rid of the baby." Harrison put his arm around her, looking solemnly into the lens. "I tried to protect her. I really did. But she is heartless. She cut off our funds. She threw her own pregnant sister onto the street. We are scared for the baby's health." The comments section was scrolling so fast it was a blur of angry emojis and death threats directed at me. They were performing perfectly. While they were busy winning the court of public opinion, I was winning the war of information. I left the office through a private elevator and took a car to the Upper East Side. I had an appointment with Dr. Aris, the private obstetrician Chloe had been seeing. Dr. Aris was a nervous man. He sat behind his desk, looking at the two large security guards standing behind me. "Ms. Stone, I cannot discuss a patient's medical history," he stammered, adjusting his glasses. "It is a violation of HIPAA laws. I could lose my license." "I am not asking you to violate anything," I said smoothly. I slid a legal document across the desk. "I am buying your practice." This is a purchase agreement for the entire clinic, including all patient records and liabilities. The offer is $3 million. Cash. Today. His eyes widened. He looked at the check, then at me. Greed battled with ethics for exactly 3 seconds before greed won. He signed the papers. "Welcome to the Valkyrie Healthcare Network," I said. "Now, as the owner, I would like to review the files to ensure compliance." I found Chloe's file immediately. She had not lied about everything. She was indeed pregnant. I pulled out the genetic screening results. I had provided the lab with a sample of Harrison's hair, which I had taken from his hairbrush weeks ago for this exact contingency. I scanned the document. The paternity test results were conclusive. Probability of paternity 0%. I turned the page. There was a note in the doctor's handwriting regarding the partner present at the first ultrasound. It was not Harrison. It was a man named Marco, listed as her personal trainer. "It seems my sister has been busy," I murmured to myself, a cold smile touching my lips. Harrison was destroying his life for a child that belonged to the man who spotted his bench press. It was almost poetic. I had the smoking gun. Now I needed to lure them into the firing squad. I returned to my office and drafted a formal letter on thick, cream-colored stationery. It was an invitation to the Valkyrie Corp Grand Launch event taking place in 48 hours. "Dear Harrison and Chloe, the pressure is too much. You win. Please attend the launch event as my guests of honor. I wish to make a public apology and discuss a compensation package of $10 million to settle this matter peacefully. Valerie." I signed it with a flourish and handed it to a courier. I knew they would come. They were desperate, greedy, and foolish enough to believe that they had actually beaten me. They had no idea that I was not inviting them to a surrender. I was inviting them to their execution. The Javits Center was transformed into a cathedral of glass and steel, illuminated by thousands of pulsating LED lights. The air hummed with the electric anticipation of 3,000 attendees, including the most powerful venture capitalists in New York and tech journalists from every major continent. The global livestream counter on the teleprompter indicated that over 5 million people were watching from home. This was not just a product launch. It was a coliseum, and I had prepared the lions. I watched from the wings as the ushers guided my special guests to their seats. Harrison, Chloe, and Evelyn walked down the center aisle with their chins held high. They were dressed in evening wear that looked expensive from a distance, but under the harsh stage lights, I could see the telltale signs of a rental service. Harrison's tuxedo jacket was slightly too tight across the shoulders, and the hem of Chloe's gown was frayed. Yet, they wore expressions of smug victory. They believed they were walking toward a $10 million settlement and a public apology. They sat in the front row, directly beneath the center spotlight, unaware that they were sitting in the blast zone. The lights dimmed to total darkness. A single bass note reverberated through the floorboards, shaking the seats. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed. "The CEO of Valkyrie Corp, Valerie Stone." I stepped into the light. I wore a sharp white suit that glowed against the black backdrop. The applause was deafening, a wave of noise that washed over me. I waited for absolute silence before I spoke. "We live in an era of distortion," I began, my voice amplified and crystal clear. "We curate our lives online. We filter our faces. We edit our truths. But what happens when the filter breaks? What happens when the only thing left is the raw, unpolished reality?" I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down. My eyes locked instantly with Harrison's. He offered me a small, arrogant nod, expecting me to segue into my resignation. I did not nod back. I smiled, but it was not a smile of surrender. It was the smile of a predator who had just locked the cage door. Harrison shifted in his seat. The confidence in his eyes flickered and died. He leaned over to whisper to Chloe, but she was too busy holding her phone up, finding the perfect angle for a selfie with the stage in the background. She was oblivious to the guillotine hanging above her neck. "Tonight, Valkyrie Corp solves the problem of deception," I announced. "I am proud to introduce our revolutionary new core system. We call it Veritas." The massive screen behind me exploded into life, displaying complex biometric data streams. "Veritas does not just listen to words," I explained. Pacing slowly across the stage, it analyzes microtremors in the vocal cords. It tracks pupil dilation, heart rate variability, and galvanic skin response. It is a polygraph test that does not require wires. It requires only a voice, and its accuracy rate in beta testing was 100%. A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw Harrison loosen his tie. He looked like he wanted to run, but he was pinned down by 3,000 witnesses. However, I continued, softening my tone to a mock gentleness. Technology is nothing without a human element. Rumors have circulated recently about my family. Ugly rumors. And I believe the best way to dispel a lie is to shine a light on it. I extended my hand toward the front row. The spotlight swung violently, blinding Harrison and Chloe in a pool of white light. "Harrison, Chloe," I said, my voice dripping with inviting warmth. "Please, join me on stage. Let us use Veritas to clear your names once and for all. Let us show the world that you have nothing to hide." The crowd erupted in applause, demanding the spectacle. The cameras swiveled to face them. Harrison looked at the exit, then at the cameras, then at me. He was trapped. If he refused, he looked guilty. If he accepted, he had to gamble that he could outact the algorithm. "Come on," Chloe whispered to him, standing up and smoothing her dress. "It's just a stupid computer program, Harrison. We can beat it. We have to." Harrison stood up slowly, his legs looking heavy. He forced a plastic smile onto his face and took Chloe's hand. They ascended the stairs to the stage, stepping into the arena I had built specifically for their destruction. "Welcome," I said, handing Harrison a microphone. "Shall we begin?" The auditorium was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Harrison stood center stage, the microphone slick with sweat in his hand. Behind him, the massive LED screen pulsed with a calm blue light, displaying his biometric baseline. "Harrison," I said, my voice echoing through the hall. "Let's start with something simple. A question of the heart. Did you truly love me when you asked me to marry you?" Harrison cleared his throat. He looked at the camera, summoned every ounce of his charm, and flashed his signature smile. "Yes," he said firmly. "I loved you more than anything." Beep. The sound was sharp and jarring. The screen behind him instantly turned a violent shade of red. Huge block letters appeared. "Lie detected. Heart rate, spike, 140%. A ripple of laughter swept through the crowd. It started as a titter and grew into a wave of mockery. It's just nerves," Harrison stammered, pointing at the screen. "I'm on stage in front of 3,000 people. Of course my heart is beating fast. This machine is calibrated wrong. The algorithm accounts for stage fright." "Harrison," I said coolly, "it isolates stress from deception. But let's move on." I turned my gaze to Chloe. She was standing with her hands on her hips, looking defiant. She believed she was smarter than the machine. "Chloe," I asked, "you have claimed publicly that the child you are carrying belongs to Harrison. Is the baby in your womb?" Harrison's biological child, Chloe, tossed her hair back and looked directly into my eyes. "Of course it is, and you are a monster for questioning it." The screen did not even wait for the echo of her voice to fade. Beep, beep, beep. Falsehood probability, 99.9%. The audience gasped. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a shocked murmur. "That's a lie," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking. "You rigged it. You programmed it to make me look bad. This is defamation. I'll sue you. Math doesn't lie. Chloe, I said, reaching into the inner pocket of my jacket. But just in case anyone doubts the code, I have the analog proof. I pulled out the manila envelope I had purchased from Dr. Eris. I opened it slowly, savoring the sound of the paper tearing. I have here the results of a non-invasive prenatal paternity test conducted at the Eris clinic, I announced, holding the document up to the light. The DNA does not match Harrison Sterling. The biological father is listed as Mr. Marko Petrovich, your personal trainer. I clicked a button on my remote. A photo appeared on the giant screen next to the lie detector results. It was a candid shot taken from a security camera outside a gym, showing Chloe kissing a muscular man in a tracksuit. Harrison froze. He turned his head slowly toward Chloe, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and dawning realization. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse standing upright. You, Harrison whispered, his voice trembling so hard the microphone shook. You told me. You swore it was mine. Harrison. Wait, Chloe cried, grabbing his arm. She's making it up. Don't listen to her. Don't touch me. Harrison roared, shoving her away with such force she stumbled in her heels. You disgusting. From the front row, a thud echoed. Evelyn Sterling had collapsed. This time, there was no theatricality. The shock of realizing her heir was the child of a gym trainer had caused her to faint dead away. Paramedics began to rush down the aisle. But we aren't done, I said, cutting through the chaos. Let's hear what you two really think about this company. I pressed play. The speakers blasted a recording I had captured months ago in the back seat of their limousine. Once the old man kicks the bucket, we dump Valerie. Harrison's voice rang out, clear and arrogant. She's a freak. We take the IP, sell it to Google for $1 billion, and move to Monaco. God, I can't wait. Chloe's voice replied. I'm so sick of pretending to be nice to her. She smells like a library. The crowd turned. The atmosphere in the room shifted from shock to pure, unadulterated fury. Boos erupted from the back of the room and surged forward. Someone threw a water bottle. It arced through the air and splashed at Harrison's feet. Then a crumpled program hit Chloe. Get off the stage, someone screamed. Frauds, another yelled. Harrison and Chloe stood in the center of the storm, exposed, humiliated, and utterly destroyed. And I stood in the shadows, watching the Veritas system validate one final truth: justice had been served. The security team formed a human shield around Harrison and Chloe, shoving them through the heavy velvet curtains into the backstage corridor. They were trembling, their faces pale and slick with sweat, believing that they had just escaped the worst of it. They were wrong. The mob out front was dangerous, but the men waiting for them in the wings were lethal. 3 agents in windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI stood waiting by the exit. One of them stepped forward, holding a pair of steel handcuffs. Harrison Sterling, the agent said, his voice flat and bored. You are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, tax evasion, and securities fraud. Harrison looked at the agent, then at me. I was standing a few feet away, leaning against a flight case, watching the finale of my orchestration. No, there must be a mistake, Harrison stammered, backing away until he hit the concrete wall. I am a victim here. She set me up. We have the ledgers. Mr. Sterling, the agent replied, snapping the cuffs onto Harrison's wrists. And the offshore account records provided by Ms. Stone. You have the right to remain silent. While Harrison was being processed like common criminal cargo, Chloe was facing her own digital execution. Her phone, which she had clutched like a lifeline, began to chime incessantly. It was not support. It was destruction. My Instagram, Chloe whispered, staring at the screen in horror. It says, account disabled for terms of service violation, And Dior just emailed me. They are terminating my contract effective immediately. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. You ruined my life. You ruined it yourself. Chloe, I said calmly. I just accelerated the timeline. Harrison suddenly dropped to his knees. The handcuffs clattered against the floor. He looked pathetic. A broken prince in a rented tuxedo. Valerie, please, he cried, tears streaming down his face. I can fix this. I can testify against the board. I will sign everything over to you. Just tell them it was a mistake. We were a team, remember. You loved me. I walked over to him. I looked down at the man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, the man who had called me a cash machine behind my back. I have saved you for 10 years, Harrison, I said softly. Every time you failed, I fixed it. Every time you stumbled, I held you up. But today I save myself. I nodded to the agents. They hauled him to his feet and marched him toward the waiting squad car. The flashbulbs of 100 paparazzi exploded as the doors opened, capturing his disgrace for the morning papers. Chloe was left standing alone in the corridor. She dialed a number frantically. Marco. Pick up, she screamed into the phone. They took Harrison. You need to come get me. What? What do you mean you don't know me? I'm carrying your… Marco. She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the screen as the line went dead. The father of her child had blocked her. She had no ride, no money, and no allies. I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing in the drafty hallway. My night was far from over. I received a notification from the city hospital system. Evelyn Sterling had regained consciousness. She was not in a private suite at Mount Sinai as she was accustomed to. She was in a crowded ward at a public hospital, lying on a gurney in the hallway because she no longer had health insurance. The nurse informed her that the ambulance ride and emergency treatment would cost her $4,000 out of pocket. I imagined her face, stripped of her dignity and her delusion, and I felt a profound sense of peace. An hour later, I was in the penthouse of the Valkyrie Corp headquarters. My team was there. The loyal engineers and designers who had stuck by me through the takeover. We raised glasses of champagne. To the truth, I said. To the boss. They cheered back. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from an unknown number. Valerie, please. I am at the bus station. I have nowhere to go. Send me $500. Just enough to get home to Mom's old house. Please. I am your sister. I looked at the message. I opened my banking app. I typed in the amount $50. I hit send with a final message. One-way bus ticket. Never come back. 1 month had passed since the night I burned down my old life to build a new one. I stood on the terrace of the Valkyrie Corp building, the wind whipping through my hair as I looked down at the grid of Chicago. The city was alive, a sprawling map of lights and shadows, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel like I was hiding in the dark. I was standing directly in the spotlight I had created for myself. The glass door behind me slid open with a soft hiss. It was Felix, my attorney. He carried a leather folio, the final chapter of a book I was ready to close. It is done. Valerie, Felix said, stepping up beside me. Harrison accepted the plea deal this morning. He admitted to all charges of embezzlement and fraud to avoid a maximum sentence. The judge gave him 5 years in federal prison. I took a sip of my sparkling water. And the assets auctioned off to pay back the creditors, Felix replied, handing me a document. The cars, the art, the jewelry, it is all gone. The Sterling name is officially bankrupt. I looked at the paperwork. It was just ink on paper, but it felt like the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders. There is one exception, I said, pointing to a line item at the bottom of the page. The mansion in Lake Forest. I bought it. Felix looked at me, surprised. Why that house is full of bad memories. Why would you want to live there? I am not going to live there, I said, turning to look him in the eye. I am gutting it. I am turning it into the Sterling Stone Foundation. It will be a sanctuary for orphaned children and women escaping domestic abuse. I am going to fill that cold, empty house with the warmth that family never gave me." Felix smiled, a genuine, warm expression. That is poetic justice, Valerie. "And your sister Chloe is back in Ohio," I said, my voice steady. "My investigator tells me she is working double shifts as a waitress at a roadside diner. She lives in a trailer park 3 miles from where we grew up. She is living the exact life she used to mock." "Do you want to send her anything?" Felix asked. "No," I replied. "She has exactly what she earned." Later that afternoon, I drove to the old mansion. The movers were already clearing out the gaudy furniture Harrison's mother had loved so much. I walked through the echoing halls until I reached Richard Sterling's study. I had moved his heavy oak desk back into its original spot. I reached into my bag and pulled out the framed patent for my artificial intelligence architecture. It was the document that started everything. I placed it gently on the desk, right where Richard used to sit and watch me code. "We did it. Richard," I whispered to the empty room. "The illusion is gone. Only the work remains." Standing there, I expected to feel a surge of triumph or perhaps a lingering spike of anger, but there was nothing. The hatred that had fueled me for 5 years had evaporated. I realized that the greatest revenge was not seeing them suffer. It was realizing that I no longer cared if they existed at all. They were just glitches in my code that I had finally patched out. I left the house and walked down to the Chicago Riverwalk. I had a meeting with a new associate. Julian was an architect, a man with ink stains on his fingers and a quiet, intense way of speaking. He was waiting for me on a bench, a roll of blueprints in his hands. He did not look at my expensive watch or my designer coat. He looked at my eyes. "Valerie," Julian said, standing up, "I looked at your sketches for the data center. The structural logic it is brilliant. I have never seen anyone integrate server cooling systems into the aesthetic like that. I value efficiency." "Julian," I said, smiling. "And honesty in design?" "I can see that," he replied softly. "It is beautiful." We walked together along the river railing. The water churned below, dark and deep. I stopped for a moment and reached into my pocket. My fingers closed around the cold metal of the engagement ring Harrison had given me years ago. It was a 3-carat diamond, heavy with lies. I did not hesitate. I pulled it out and tossed it over the railing. It caught the moonlight for a brief second, a tiny spark falling into the abyss, before it vanished into the murky water with a silent splash. "What was that?" Julian asked, looking at the ripples. "Just some old debris," I said. "Nothing important." I turned my back on the river and opened my sketchbook. I showed Julian the fresh page where I had started drawing lines for a new project. It was a blueprint for a smart city, a place designed with total transparency, where corruption could not take root because the very infrastructure was built on truth. "Let's start," I said to Julian. "I have a lot of work to do." I walked forward into the night, my shadow stretching long and strong on the pavement, finally free, finally whole, and finally writing my own story. Thank you so much for listening to my story until the very end. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from right now so we can connect and share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.